Well, Kirk, we are on an episode of Lessons from Last Time, a bit of a different episode than we are used to. So whose idea was this?
Yours had to be. It's a great idea, so it had to be yours.
It wasn't my idea. I was told to go in the studio and talk to Kirk. So.
Well, I think the idea was born from the fact that we've had a lot of fun doing these with guests here. We've actually, you've had me on the podcast, and then I interviewed you on your own podcast. And I think there's enough, what did you say? We have 50 plus episodes.
Yeah,
of the
we're
books
over 50 now. Yeah.
So out of that lexicon of episodes, we've got a lot of things to talk about, and recent experiences in the business. We've got a few things to talk about. So I think we just decided it'd be a good idea to reflect a little bit and talk about things that are going on in the world around us and share those with our audience.
Well, and people should know, if you're listening to this podcast on Apple Podcast or any of the places you hear podcasts, you're not going to see the video, so you won't totally understand what's going on between us. But right now, for those of you watching this in the coop, you can see this. But we have our coffee mugs, and both of us have tea, and you have a journal ready to write, and both of us have readers. So I feel like this is going to be some wisdom we'll be dropping in this episode.
We've got tea and readers. That alone screams wisdom.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
All right. So we just got back from Momentum Builder. And so we want to talk a little bit about that experience, our takeaways, and really the lessons. A lot of the lessons on this episode are based on lifelong lessons or things, in very concentrated periods of time in people's lives, what they went through, what the lessons are they can take out of that. But we really want to go deep on, okay, what are the lessons we can take out of this last trip? Both lessons that we learned from people speaking on stage, but also lessons of the experience of going to a conference, the experience of, I got to speak at the conference. So some of those takeaways we have from being more strategic and direct about the way we ran or the way we handled ourselves at that conference and the things that we did.
Yeah, and the unintended consequences, because you couldn't have scripted what happened as a result of being true to who you are, being true to a plan for how we want to represent ourselves at this event. And these events are always different. And, there's people who go to these events and have what I call the retreat effect. Oh, they learn the 5 things that they can do tomorrow to improve their business. And then they go home, and maybe they are 5 legitimate things, but implementation is the magic of everything. And people go home and they're not standing there listening to an inspirational speaker tell them the 5 things, so they go home and they forget them or they don't implement them, and then it kind of becomes not necessarily a great utilization of the time there. But it was really fun to go there with our own specific plan as a sponsor, as a speaker in your case, and as a company who does business with a lot of the attendees, or would like to do business with a lot of the attendees, does business with some of them. It was really fascinating to watch how this unfolded as a result of being true to who we are and true to who you are.
Yeah. So let's just break down the basics. This is an event called Momentum Builder. This is mainly run by 2 guys named Don and Gino, who have an amazing force behind them. Like, they couldn't do this by themselves. Their support staff is just unbelievable. And so, but those guys had the dream of, we want to bring people together and help them grow their business, help give them all the tools necessary. It's really been their, attempt to make the world a better place, the mortgage world a better place. And so I've never been part of it actually, but I was referred to them by my buddy Josh Pitts. I went out to Scottsdale and we had a planning session for this conference. So first of all, when you look at these conferences you go to, people should understand there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make these things happen. The coolest thing was Don and Gino got the planning session, which was like Bill Dallas was in the planning session, and Josh Pitts and Craig Davis and Sasha Stair, like a lot of really good people in the industry. And all they did is called their friends and said, would you be willing to help? And we were like, absolutely. Like, I got on that plane not knowing what to expect because I wanted to support people training people in the industry. And so I think the first takeaway or lesson for me is, I think we have resources in this industry that we're just not calling on. And there are people that in the industry, we're so tight as a group that when you're going through something, you can reach out to people and say, hey, I want to call a squad together and figure out how we can get this thing accomplished. And sometimes people don't know they can do that. They don't realize the resources they've built. Even at this conference, when you were walking around, people are walking up to you, and you haven't been in the business in a while, and people are walking up like, Kirk Faulkner, like it was a big deal. Just knowing you have resources is probably one of the best things you can do in the industry, and then knowing how to utilize those resources in a way that doesn't make people feel used, right? I never felt used. I always felt like I was part of the mission. But yeah, people will answer the call.
Well, you could tell that one of their core purposes was to create community, a greater sense of community, which is ironic because it's one of our core purposes is to have a community where mortgage professionals can congregate and learn from each other, learn hopefully from the content we provide. But there was this real strong sense of community. Now, look, it's not La La Land, right? There are people who are there to sell stuff.
Totally.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
It's a conference full of people who are looking to potentially buy stuff. But you get really good in a short amount of time when you listen to someone speak from the platform, whether it's the promoters of the event or you or anyone else, whether or if there's some agenda beyond, I just want to build into this community.
Right.
And it's okay if there is more, because it's okay that you're there to sell something. I'm not trying to be judgmental at all, but you got to speak first.
Yeah.
And we talked about what you were going to present on the way down there. And you didn't have real clarity because, in fairness, you speak oftentimes at compliance sort of events. This is a sales event. This isn't your normal. It's not that you've never done it before, but it's not your normal jam, right?
Yeah.
So you talked about some ideas you had, and there were some things that were formulating, but none of those ideas really ended up what you presented from the stage, did they?
No, I actually didn't know what I was going to say. In fact, the night before I was sitting with Phil Treadwell and I looked at him, he was speaking on the same stage I was on, and I go, hey, do you know what you're saying tomorrow? He's like, not yet. And I'm like, me neither. Like, it felt really good. And at the same time, I lean a lot on last minute. Part of the superpower of ADHD is that we can create brilliance in the last minute. I just wish we could do it earlier. But I sometimes lean on that. And so I'll go to bed not knowing what I'm going to say the next day. The thing is with things like where the market's going, what's happening in the industry, what the CFPB is doing, all the stuff around AI and on cybersecurity, I'm researched on that. Like, I don't need to go prepare a speech.
Currently researched.
I'm busting out stuff that I read yesterday because I'm passionate about it, and I'm used to putting that speech together. And so I'm used to being able to do it. In fact, one of my favorite speeches I ever gave was a dinner speech. 𝗠𝗵𝗿 was sitting next to me in Seattle at the Washington Mortgage Bankers Association. And I'm about to go up and speak. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I don't know. What should I say? And he's like, are you kidding me? And I'm like, no, I need a list. And he goes, are you serious? And I go, give me a list. Like, what do you guys care about? And so my little table at dinner wrote the list. I wrote it on a napkin, and that literally was my speech. And I crushed it because I know all that stuff, right? That's easy for me. Standing up and speaking from the heart, it does come naturally, but structuring that speech is not something I'm used to. At the end of every 8-hour conference or every 8-hour CE class I do, I usually take the last 15, 20 minutes and just give them some life lesson that I'm going through or some challenge in life to do. And that's usually my favorite part of the CE is when I can actually touch hearts. But going up there and doing 20 minutes, that's like a TED Talk. And being able to do that and know what I'm going to say, like I wish I would have prepared more, but it ended up being okay.
Well, my feedback on that was, you could have prepared more in the delivery, but the content was rich. It's exactly what you needed to say. And it's, as it turns out, it's exactly what the audience, at least a good chunk of them, wanted to hear or needed to hear.
Yeah. I literally woke up that morning with this thought in my head. It was I believe a message from God that was like, get your iPad. Let me tell you what I want you to say. And I started writing, and that's where I came up with everything I said was, the structure of that was it just poured into my head when I woke up that day.
And it was about identity.
Yeah.
And how we sometimes choose to identify.
Yeah.
Sometimes accurately, sometimes inaccurately, sometimes overly positively, and sometimes overly negatively.
Yeah. And a lot of it came from this podcast, right? So a lot of the message was, you weren't as good as you thought you were in 21. And
rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, and you're not as bad as you think you are right now. And the faster you can get to getting rid of blame, the faster you can get to planning. And I think so many people still are caught up in this, this is me, this is on me. I'm failing my family. I'm failing my company. I'm worried I'm going to get let go. Do I even belong here anymore? Do I even matter here anymore? All of the emphasis on production confuses people and makes them go, well, my production must dictate my value. And my message was, your production doesn't dictate your value. And I even said, I hope I didn't screw up anybody's speech, but I said, there's going to be all these people on stage and they're going to talk about how many loans they do. And it's going to be super cool. And they're going to look really polished. But based on this podcast, we've met with so many of the most incredible and insanely cool people in the industry. And not one of them is like, yeah, I've pretty much always been good. Everybody struggles. Everybody goes through it. And what I said from stage is beware that you don't look at these speakers as if they have something you don't. They have something different than you do. And you may have something just absolutely amazing. But when we compare ourselves, we lose track of our identity and who we are because we just compare. And by the way, that's an Instagram thing, right?
Yes. Instagram,
kids
Facebook,
struggle with this constantly.
Yep.
Am I really cool? Like, look at them and look at what they're doing. And then
look how many likes they got.
you compare your insides to somebody else's outsides. It's like the worst thing you can do.
What struck me as fascinating in what you said, and what I think really resonated with the audience, was this idea of, if all you said was, it's a really rough market, please don't identify yourself by how bad this market is. You're not as bad as this market is. Well, that's a true statement, but it's incomplete without the other side.
Yeah.
You're also not as good as you were in 2020,
Yeah.
2021, 22, and that's okay too.
Right.
The recognition of the former gives perspective, the recognition of the latter gives perspective for the former. You can deal better with your own feelings of insecurity about how bad the market is and how bad you might think you are if you can come to the understanding of, well, I wasn't as good as I thought I was in 2021 because the market was just crushing and I was just going along with it.
Yeah.
I may have worked hard. I may have bettered myself in my CRM use or, database marketing or social media marketing, but the market helped me out quite a bit. And now the market's not. I can't identify with either one. So what can people identify with?
Yeah, I think that's the golden question, right? So if you can't identify with either one, then you have to understand your value doesn't come from your productivity. So the question is, who do you want to be? Like, what's the real you that you want to be? And Mindy always says, my wife always says, know thyself. Like, the best thing you can do is know yourself. Like, know who you are, know what you're trying to be. If I had my targets on being Bill Gates, or if I had my targets on being Steve Jobs, or, I own a technology company, but I'm not Steve Jobs and I'm not Bill Gates. And if that's my goal and that's who I'm comparing myself to, I'm in trouble, right? But for me, it's not even about that. For me, it's changing lives, and am I affecting people and changing their lives? And if I am, then I feel really good, regardless of whether the company's making, Apple money or whether we're making, very far from Apple money. It can't come down to that. It has to come down to my own measurements. And so it's knowing who you want to be and are you really, and let me just give you one example of that. I have a friend who's a loan officer. All she wants to be is a great mom. And she didn't do numbers. I mean, she did good numbers, but never did numbers like everybody else did. And she woke up and competed right next to people, right next door to her that were crushing it, doing way more loans. And she was like, cool, I'm an amazing mom and I do loans. Like, she knew that her identity would be found in those kids of hers, her husband, and also she's a good loan officer. So you can't measure yourself unless you know, like, what's my goal? What am I trying to achieve? And it can't be production numbers.
Because there's a fundamental difference between who we are and what we do to turn the cash register. There's, a million different ways of saying it. And I don't want to tease this too much, but people are going to get a treat here in a few weeks with an episode we did recently with 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗏.
Oh, yeah.
And talking about the neuroscience behind change and how people change. And I'm not going to give away that episode, but one thing that came up in that is how we think or talk to ourselves about ourselves can have a dramatic impact on how we view a positive or a negative market. And, there's a million different philosophies or religions. In the Christian faith, it's as a man thinketh, so he becomes. In more the Eastern version of that is change your thoughts and you change your world. And it cannot be more categorically and objectively proven true over time that your thoughts are a huge influencer. So you got up on stage, you shared your heart, which had an impact on people in the audience, as evidenced by what occurred after you spoke and for the next 2.5 or 3 days of that conference. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it was probably 2 or 3 years ago that I started opening up on stage. It was really 2020 that did it to me. 2020, I was a complete wreck. And so when I would talk on stage, I couldn't help but share my struggle and the pain I had gone through. And what I found is by sharing that pain, I found my connection with humans who had gone through the same pain. So I don't think there was one seminar that I did from 2020 to now where I shared my story and somebody didn't come up and say, that's me. Like, all the extroverts, right? So, and in the mortgage industry, there's a lot of extroverts. And so I found that by opening up my heart and not holding back, I could connect with people at a much deeper level than ever. And so that's what I did on stage. And it was more, I shared my ADHD story, a little bit of it. I shared my favorite new stat is with rejection-sensitive dysphoria, which a lot of people with ADHD have. By 12 years old, you receive 20,000 more negative or correcting statements than anybody else. And so I talked about that and opened up about, these are the things that I've gone through, and talked about your owner's manual, and like, are you living by your owner's manual, which is probably one of the things that I've shared the most lately that's gotten the most impact with people. It's, with a car, you have an owner's manual. If you were to pour syrup in the gas tank, your car would break because the owner's manual says you need this specific type of fuel. And the same thing goes with our lives, right? I know when I'm my best, and I've got a list of things called my owner's manual. And on that list is everything that when I do those things, I live at the highest level I can live. And I'm happy and my relationships go well and the company does well. But I fall off that a little bit, right? So I can't run right now because of my knee. So that goes away. And then am I journaling? Well, journaling's hard, right? And so I start dipping to a point when Mindy goes, are you doing your owner's manual? Like she'll see it. And now that's like one of our statements, like, hey, it seems like you might not be doing your owner's manual. And
You're
like,
drifting.
I'm not.
Yeah.
And so talking about like write your owner's manual and then always go back to it, make sure that you're living by what makes you your highest and best self. Right. So yeah, so I shared that. And then all the comments after were just epic. Like every conversation I had was people opening up about their experiences, about their lives. I don't want to share what people had told me, but there's some deep conversations I had right after that had I not opened up, I don't get to have those conversations. So I think I did a video, a Friday update video that just was like, hey, open up more. Like the more vulnerable you can be with other people, the more you get to share in a much deeper life than keeping everybody, behind a wall or keeping your stuff hidden.
And sincere vulnerability, I think, can be defined in one simple, powerful, and beautiful word, and that's called empathy. Mm-hmm. When people experience that in an environment, well, in any environment, but especially in an environment like that, where you're kind of expecting somebody on stage to talk about how great they are, how great their company is, or how great their product and services are, and I'll have some anecdotal statements about life to sprinkle in there, but at the end, you're going to want to buy my stuff.
Right.
And again, I'm not being critical at all.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's necessarily superficial.
Right.
But when somebody gets up on stage and says, I'm human, and in 2021, I suffered from all the frailties of being a human, thinking I was really good at this game. And in 2023, in the beginning of 24, I suffer from all the human frailties of thinking maybe I suck. And neither are true. But when you have that kind of vulnerability, empathy flows through the microphone and people respond to it. And that's exactly what happened in this particular event.
You know the funny thing? The guy after me did a demo of his software.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no. Did I do it wrong? Was I supposed to demo?
A really high energy demo
oh my
of your
gosh.
software.
And then I go through my head and I'm like, we just launched AI. Like we have the most powerful AI in the mortgage industry, I believe right now. We just launched it and I'm like, I didn't even say AI. And then I was like, did I tell him what company I work for? Like there's so many thoughts of, we always see other people. And again, goes back to comparing myself. I'm sitting there going, I should have scrapped that speech and just done one about 𝗬𝗍𝗄 and how game changing it is, or, what an awesome platform we have. And so I started to doubt myself, but it was so shortly after that whole thing changed when people started coming up and saying, that's the message I needed. And I was like, okay, never mind. Like,
and
I'm
also,
good.
even bigger than that, it really was, and Don and Gino said from the stage, in so many words, this is what they want this conference to be about.
Yeah.
It's a mission-driven conference.
Right.
Not every speaker there is on the same mission,
Right.
but this is what they intended, which is why they had the group of people come together for a planning session beforehand, and like-minded people came together and helped put this together. They wanted a mission-driven conference that encouraged community, that encouraged breaking down more than just the 5 things you needed to succeed in 2024, right? Wanted to be about human connection, and your opening speech set that tone. Doesn't matter what came next, because during the next 3 days, the theme that they set and that you encouraged perpetuated through many of the people that got up on stage and through the conversations that took place off the stage at break time or at dinner. Those were the things that defined the conference.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, Craig Davis crushed it.
Oh my
gosh. If
gosh.
you're looking at people that did a great job at that conference, Craig Davis, if people, if our listeners have not listened to the Craig Davis podcast, I mean, that's gold.
Yep.
And so watching that guy get up on stage, it was so cool seeing him just open himself up too, because he talks about having been through his cancer and beating cancer, and he talks about losing his job when Finance of America went under. He is open and vulnerable, and I loved that. Like I love that it's not just me standing up there being vulnerable, and then the rest of it is just an old conference. I did feel that. Ryan Grant talked about mental health. Like Ryan Grant, like he's the chiseled jawline. I mean, that guy makes me look like I don't even like standing next to him, right? Perfect performer, crushes it with loans, leads a huge team, massive brand, And his speech was about mental health. And I was like, that's freaking gold. Like that is, let's get into it, because I believe that, and I want to mention Scanlon also all the time, because that podcast that people are going to see in a couple weeks is just gold. But his whole thing was, you know, it's not that you're not making enough calls right now. It's there's something else going on. Let's figure out that narrative that you have in your head. And so the more we can get to solving real problems in our lives, freeing ourselves up to be able to see our businesses the proper way, then we can really grow. And so I did love the amount of people that came up with that. Now I want to ask you about the economy piece, and let's see how this conversation goes.
Oh boy.
So one of the takeaways or the lessons from this, we had a couple speakers on the economy, and it was interesting seeing them disagree.
Yeah.
So it was Barry
Pretty
and
significant
was it
disagreement.
Danielle, is that her name?
I believe that's correct.
And she's like a beast. She is a powerhouse.
Well, she's Fox News, she's MSNBC, she's
CNBC,
CNBC, she's all over everywhere,
Yeah.
and has a YouTube channel and a Twitter handle, and is really she's all over everything.
Oh yeah. When I was talking to some people afterwards, they said, you know, I was talking to some women at the conference, and they said, you know, she is a woman in a world of men, in a knowledge-filled, like, how much do you know? You know, she's been in rooms where she's been, you know, talked down to. She's been in rooms when she's been mansplained to. And so she is a tough woman. Like, she is a powerhouse.
Yeah.
And so it's funny seeing her and Barry disagree. And I actually had, I did a video, Andy just produced it. It's a Friday challenge video of like, what do we care about, or what do we need to care about? And I was in the back of that room when they were talking, and this loan officer back there said, you know, does anybody need to know this stuff? And it was really funny, because I've always been of the opinion that everybody should know everything, right? Because I'm a big knowledge freak, and I eat that stuff for
Knowledge is
breakfast,
power,
right? Yeah. But what he said is, how much of this is distracting people from going out there and doing what they're supposed to be doing? Because then you're like, well, see the market. You know, we're not going to get an adjustment until July. The Fed's going to drop. Or Barry says June, she said July. But like, look, that's why I'm not successful. And so people might embrace that information in the wrong way and not have it as power, but instead have it as an excuse. And I thought that's an interesting takeaway, that maybe we don't need to hear that, or maybe it's for just some of the audience that is going to go dive in even more. But I can imagine if you didn't know much about the markets, you could walk in there and be a little scared. Like when she says there's a housing bubble, that could give you that justification of why you're not successful. Like, see, it's something else. It's not me.
But the converse of that is there's plenty of people running around saying, June, we should see sub 6% interest rates by June, worst case July.
Right.
And these are all predictions.
Right.
And what Barry was honest enough to say from the stage was, I've been wrong twice this year.
Yeah.
I thought we'd be under, I think he said, I thought we'd be under 6 by now, or
Yeah.
something like that,
Yeah.
whatever the number was. And it's, in fact, one of the speakers who followed her directly said from the platform, I don't know why we need to waste time with, you know, discouraging predictions that aren't
Yeah.
necessarily true. Well, we waste time with overly positive predictions that aren't necessarily true.
Right.
And wouldn't you rather face the marketplace with an understanding of, I need to have my business plan executing at a high level regardless of what the market dishes out, because circumstances outside of your control. That, I think, was her message. Do what you do, and do it as good as you can, be as informed as you can, because there are things that influence this economy and interest rates and the marketplace that you cannot control.
Right.
And if you master what you can, then you'll be in a best case scenario for whatever the market dishes out.
Right.
That was profound.
Yeah.
And it was consistent. With building community means providing information and knowledge that people can really benefit from. And if all we do is stand up there and say, rah, rah, it's going to be great, it's going to be great, and it turns out not to be, we've really done a disservice.
Yeah. I got to tell you, there's a different, I did this conference a little differently than I normally do. And I shouldn't even bring it up because I don't want to encourage anybody to do this. As a speaker, it sucks when people leave the room. But there were certain sessions where they were great sessions and they didn't apply to me. And I sat there going, I can stay here and like check my email and be looking down at my phone, and you couldn't even, like, standing on that stage, you can't see anybody.
Right.
So it wouldn't even affect the speaker, right? And I was like, okay, what's my highest and best right now? Do I listen to this for another hour, or is there somebody that I may be connecting with over there in the trade show? Is there somebody in the hallway I need to go connect with? And I maximize my time that way. So I don't want people just like, this doesn't apply to me, and walking out of sessions. But I did that, and it actually made me feel pretty good. There was a couple guys talking about Instagram and becoming an influencer on Instagram. It's a great example of, I think it's great for a lot of people to do. I think it's super cool. I don't think everybody's built to be an influencer. I don't think everybody has that energy that those guys had. I mean, the guy that was speaking is full of energy. I want to talk to him all the time. Like, I would watch all that guy's videos. But I don't know that that's valuable. And I worry that people will listen to that and they're like, maybe I'm supposed to be him, instead of kind of going back to that thought of maybe I'm supposed to figure out who I am. And so I think a tough thing, or a good lesson from these conferences, is learning yourself and going, what am I drawn to? Because if he's talking about Instagram and shooting videos, you're like, dude, I want to do that. Sign up. Go pay him his monthly. Like, he's there to sell
Absolutely.
you something. Go pay him his monthly, because you may just crush it. But if you're like, I'm just going to do that because I have nothing else I'm doing, and that may be it. Maybe that's the one. That's like,
I'll try this.
Successful sales roulette,
Yeah.
right? Well, you're just going to dump a bunch of money into something you're never going to use. You probably shouldn't even be there to listen, because it's going to confuse you about who you are. So I don't know where the line is of turning your ears off at some point, or is there value in everything?
Well, I would say, in most cases, your company's not sending you to this event. In most cases, you're paying to participate as a mortgage professional. You're going to this event because you want to better yourself.
Yeah.
So you get to self-select.
Yeah.
If you're sitting in the audience and somebody's going to present on database marketing, and you've already invested thousands, you got a dialed-in database marketing scheme, that's not really what you came here for, and you got some people out there that you can connect with, or maybe you need to go return a few emails or phone calls because you're still kind of working when you're at a conference like this. You go do that. Nobody gets to tell you when you can and can't leave the room.
Yep.
Now, if you're leaving the room to go hang out at the pool and drink Jello shots, well, that might be, maybe you should have reconsidered why you're at the conference in the first place, right?
Totally.
But if you're leaving the room to go do something that's more directly impactful to who you are, you get to pick because you wrote the check to be there. Yeah. It's like going to college. You know, if you're paying for college, you get to pick what classes you take and all that fun stuff. I don't want to end this conversation without at least anonymously alluding to one of the people who approached you afterwards. And we won't mention any names, and it's not appropriate to do so. But woman mortgage professional came up and directly identified with what you said. And talked with you at length. I mean, we were both standing there, but she was talking with you because she identified so directly with ADHD and the struggles you've dealt with and the things you shared from a vulnerable standpoint, and her own life and her own family and how that affected her. Talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
you know, it's interesting because my wife, Mindy, is a ADHD expert. She has been on podcasts and on some webinars about ADHD, and she specifically has talked about women with ADHD. And the interesting thing is boys are way more diagnosed with ADHD than girls are, because girls present differently. So they have the same struggles, but they're not jumping around the room usually. And so it's harder to track and catch those things. And oftentimes it takes until way later in life for one to even be diagnosed with ADHD. But there's always been that thing that's held them back from the success they believe they could have had. And so hers was an interesting story because she has always had a support team. And now without one, it's exposing a lot of those things, right? Like, my ADHD is completely covered up by you guys. Like, I mean, I get to have the best superpower of ADHD, but it's also because Andy's sitting here and he's going to go edit this video and I don't have to finish it, right? I can start it. Andy's going to finish it, right?
Right.
I don't have to, Angie books all the conferences, you know, Allison manages my entire calendar and, you know, runs the company with you. So I'm covered. But if you weren't here, I mean, you should have seen it when it was just me back in 2003. Like, I was playing video games and going, I should probably be working. So it's easy for us to fall off when we don't have that support. And she had gone through a situation where now she doesn't have the support, and it's exposing some things. And so she was looking for coaching. She also had a situation. And I guess here's what I want to say without giving a lot of detail. She had a family situation, a younger person who has ADHD that's dealing with some things. I have a friend whose daughter has ADHD and is an absolute beast in the mortgage industry. And she has overcome so much in her life. And she still struggles, but mightily beats this thing all the time, or finds ways to be the best version of herself possible. And I was easily able to be like, you need to talk to that person, right? So again, going back to that vulnerability piece, if you're vulnerable and say, look, this is what I'm struggling with, you may be talking to somebody who has a resource that they can be like, oh man, this is the person you need to talk to. And time again in all of our lives, if we're honest, when we've talked things out, we happen to be talking to somebody who has a connection. Like, people want to help people, but in order to get that help, you have to be vulnerable enough to say it out loud and walk up to somebody. I had a guy do that too. He's walked up right after that and he's like, I just wanted to meet you because of the whole ADHD thing. And I'm like, dude, let's talk. And it was just same thing. You know, he struggled with the same stuff. I do have a coach that we're going to connect with to try and get people more, you know, I'm never going to coach anybody on ADHD because I need a coach. I don't need to be one, but I'm going to get a coach we can refer people to because that's a big deal.
Well, and lest anyone is listening to this thinking that the idea is we're patting ourselves on the back or this is the rah-rah Ken Perry, aren't you great for being vulnerable? It was her vulnerability that created the opportunity for you to bring a resource to her so that she could solve a problem. Had she not been vulnerable, had she not had empathy for the person, her family member that needed help desperately, because it didn't have to be something as powerful and emotional as you struggling with ADHD and that making it comfortable for someone else. The woman who spoke about the economy, when she was done standing out in the hallway, there were 30 or 40 people standing around her wanting more. And there was not one emotional or, you know, personal development thing she said. She talked about the economy and data and her vast knowledge, and people just wanted more. So they pressed into her because she was available. She was willing to stand out in the hallway and be vulnerable for 45 minutes. Paid speaker, paid well to be there. Big brand, big economist, big name. And she's standing out there talking to a bunch of people who are attending Momentum Builders 2024 and giving them all the time and pictures and everything that they wanted.
But that's the thing. You have to go talk to those people.
Yes.
Like, I think that's a good lesson. When you go to a conference and somebody does something, you're like, I really want to meet them. Go freaking meet them. Like, as a guy that's been on stages for 21 years, I've never had anybody walk up at a conference and have me be like, dude, really? I don't want to have this conversation. Like, that's why we do it.
Yes.
Right? So most people on stage want to change lives or want to affect people in a positive way. If you walk up to them and go, hey, I just want to let you know that really affected me. Like, that was a really powerful message. Do that, right? If you go, I just have one more question because this has been driving me crazy. Can I just ask you? Yeah, they want to answer it. Like, I don't know anybody that would turn you away from asking a question.
It's funny you say that because I was one of those people that sought her out after she spoke because I was blown away by her knowledge and her ability to present. And so I'm part of that crowd of 30 or 40 people, and I'm waiting. I'm trying to be polite because other people are asking questions, and I finally get a chance to ask my question. And one of the things I wanted to ask her was the second question was, would you be willing to be on the podcast? And, you know, in my naivete, I didn't realize at that point who she was and how well accomplished she is and how big an audience she already commands. And she said, happy to, just reach out to my publicist. And I realized, okay, you just went out over your skis, Kirk.
Yeah.
You're
But you went after it.
Well, I'm not going to not ask, right? Because she could have said yes. But she was so gracious with her time. And then all of a sudden people are saying, can I take a selfie? Sure you can. She's not who people would normally think of selfie material, which leads me back to the superpower of empathy.
Right.
This isn't rah-rah Ken Perry, what a great guy. It's thank you, Ken, for being willing to be vulnerable because it's an expression of empathy, knowing that there's other people out there in the audience that are struggling maybe with the same thing, maybe with something radically different. But if you let your guard down enough to be human from the stage, you give them a chance to say, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And then they reach out to you in their own expression of empathy to whoever's in their world or to you to reaffirm to you, you're not alone. You're not the only one struggling with this. Here's my name and here's what I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
It just gives us that thing that we're trying to create at the Coop, that thing that Don and Gino are trying to create, which is community.
Yeah.
It's a powerful, powerful thing.
Yeah.
And hard to create.
Yeah.
It's much easier to stand up there and give people 5 things that will change their mortgage career. And maybe it will, maybe it won't. But it's easier to do that than it is to really connect with humans.
And one last lesson, it's do some digging and conversations. I mean, I had so many people that are like, I don't want to get into my story. And I'm like, please do.
Yeah.
I caught that and went, no, why wouldn't you want to get into your story? And
you're talking to me about me getting into my story.
Right.
People have this natural apprehension. Well, I'm being selfish if I talk about my story. Well, I just did, and you're talking to me because I did, because I was willing to let my guard down a little bit. You're talking to me. Goodness sakes, we're here for a reason. Let's talk.
And when one person said, I don't usually talk about this, I'm like, that's a gift. Like I see that as like, this is amazing. Like I get the chance to hear a story that she doesn't normally talk about. Like what a cool opportunity to be a listener and to just go and just be there, be present in that moment for somebody. And when somebody says, I don't normally talk about that, like understand this is a very big deal and lean in and go, I want to hear it. Like I'm here for it. Let's go. And that, that's a new thing for me, right? To be able to listen. And you and Allison are reading this book that's helping me understand how to be present in somebody's world. And that, gosh, that's a cool tool to create that connection. What I want to do is I want to go back and forth and just do a quick shout out Sesh for the people that we hung out with or saw, so that, you know, if listeners don't know these people, I would love for them to know them. So maybe we go back and forth a little bit.
Sure.
My man, Josh Pitts, more energy than anybody I've ever met in my entire life. People are like, dude, what is that guy on?
What a great guy.
He's not on anything, doesn't even drink. But dude, Josh Pitts and Dal were amazing the whole time. And MC the event, MC being like bringing up all the different people, and just so much power and energy from that guy.
Well, you got to go with Craig Davis too, who spent the entire, his purpose there wasn't to have a 20-minute speech. It was to sprinkle what he called bacon, right?
Yeah.
He was sprinkling
bits.
nuggets throughout the entire event. He'd be on stage for 5 minutes, and then he'd be out, you know, when there was a break, he'd be out in the audience giving away stickers or doing fun stuff.
Yeah.
He was sprinkling nuggets, and he was bringing so much encouragement.
Yeah. Okay, I'm taking yours, 𝗪𝗏𝗶𝗿.
Oh.
Oh my gosh, you were going to get there if I
knew I
didn't.
should have gone there.
We both have such a leadership crush on her.
Absolutely.
She is one of the best leaders of the industry, hands down, top 3 leaders in the entire mortgage industry. She showed up to be on stage and share her wisdom, and every time she talks, I just want to learn more.
Yeah, and likewise, since you stole 𝗪𝗏𝗶𝗿, I'm going to go Bill Dallas.
Oh, nice.
There was an appreciation for the speakers at this event that was done on Tuesday night after the opening session, and as you know, and the invitation was to have dinner at Bill Dallas's home just outside of Las Vegas. Yeah. And first of all,
a humble little abode.
Yeah, humble little abode. Well, if you know anything about Bill Dallas in his past, you know it was hardly a humble abode, but the man himself and his wife were there having dinner with a bunch of, opened their home to a bunch of strangers, 100-ish people, and we're sitting there conversing and dialoguing with people all night long. I got a chance to chat with him for about 15 minutes about the podcast episode he was on and the one he's going to be on. Bill could not have been more gracious. I got to chat with his wife. She just had hip surgery, and I'm maybe facing that myself one of these days. And it was epic to see somebody that's achieved at that level be so gracious and inviting and welcoming to a whole bunch of strangers.
Yeah. Phil Treadwell brought his team there with his coaching company. I've never hung out with Phil. Like, we know each other, but I've never really spent a lot of time. And all but one night, we would just meet up with his little crew, and we would just chat about life stuff, and it was awesome. So that was super cool. He's great on stage, but like more importantly, just having that personal connection with him was really cool.
Well, it'd be hard we'd be remiss if not calling out Don and Gino in this. I mean, they stayed true to their purpose of doing this, and they're great guys, very approachable. They were always at the break room at the end of a session, shaking hands and kissing babies, and were always available at every aspect of the event.
And their team, their squad,
their team was amazing.
Yeah. All right, only a couple more. I'm gonna go Casey Crawford. Holy crap. Every time that guy opens his mouth, it's like an Instagram reel. Yeah. Like, he's the real deal. Yeah. And I've seen him speak once, but this was more him answering questions on a panel. So totally unprepared, answering questions. And I was floored by how much wisdom that dude has, how smart he is, how much passion and love he has. I caught him in the outside of this session, and I totally fanboyed all over him because I'm a Buccaneers fan, and I had to tell him, you know, I was a Bucs fan since 6th grade, and what they did to the Raiders when he was on the team, and my dad's a Raiders fan. I went off on that. I think I forgot to tell him what I do for a living, but dude, it was amazing.
Well, I'm going to go off the stage for a minute with my last one. I'm hoping maybe you mention Eric, because that was a great connection too. But Patrick Palmer.
Yeah.
I've known Patrick for a long time. He was actually my boss for a while. He recruited me to Alpine before Alpine became Pinnacle, and then Pinnacle became Finance of America. Patrick has always been one of these guys that I just look at and go, good gosh, how did he get to be so smart? Good gosh, how did he get to be so, at such a young age, to create such a incredible company, experience, network of people. And then we got to go out to dinner with him one night and just hang. And Patrick he has evolved into the man he is today, even better than he was when I first met him. He's just a great guy, a great human being, and still probably the smartest person in the room, with a few rare exceptions. If you're having a mortgage conversation and Patrick's in the room, there's a pretty good chance he's the smartest guy in the room, but he doesn't wear it like a badge of honor. He just shares it as a source of insight and perspective and wisdom.
There's so many other people we can talk about. We've got to cut it off there because we wanted to make this a 30-minute. Now it's 40 minutes. So there you go.
Yeah, but with commercial interruptions and all that.
80 minutes.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. I guess our takeaway, besides all the things we just talked about, is, you know, be strategic about what you're doing. People who sometimes don't want to go to a conference because they're like, well, you know, it's a lot of money. And if you go to one and you're strategic about how you do it, you plan well, you look for speakers you're really trying to get it connected with, you talk to them afterwards, you look at who's at the conference you really want to, you know, network with, then I mean, you're gonna have a better event. But more importantly, if you open yourself up a little bit, share stories, and start really looking for that deeper connection, you can pull so much of just life stuff out of these things.
Well, I would say this, my concluding thoughts would be empathy is a superpower.
Yeah.
And it's a superpower because it invests in other.
Yeah.
And I would venture a guess, and you can close with the answer to this question, I would venture a guess that you were vulnerable, you shared from stage, other people got really rich nuggets out of that.
Mm-hmm.
I would venture a guess that Ken Perry got more out of those interactions than they got from Ken Perry on the stage. And that's not diminishing what you said from the stage, but I watched you get so much out of that, as would anybody.
I got off stage. I'm like, I'm gonna speak everywhere on that. I'm gonna deliver that speech better every time. I'm actually speaking in Wyoming, and I get to keynote that conference, Wyoming Mortgage Lenders Association, and I'm keynoting with that speech. So I'm gonna perfect it and polish it and make it something I didn't just wake up with. But yeah, I never want to stop.
Well, we're not going to do these every week, but we're going to do them when we feel like there's something meaningful for us to talk about. So we appreciate you indulging us.
Yeah.
We appreciate the time that you're spending watching us.
There you go.
Yep.